With the ongoing horrors in the former Yugoslavia still being shown on TV news around the world daily, the United Nations established the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. While it seemed unlikely at this stage that the perpetrators of atrocities would be immediately brought to account, the court's business would in the first instance be to build cases and gather evidence and issue indictments as a statement of intent. Aston Villa lost 1-0 at home to Oldham Athletic to end their title run and crown Manchester United as the first champions of the newly inaugurated Premier League, with Villa and Norwich City qualifying for the UEFA Cup. Not only did Nick Henry's goal for Oldham decide the title, but it rescued his own team from relegation, sending Crystal Palace down in their place along with Middlesbrough and Nottingham Forest. It was Manchester United's first league title since 1966-67. The co-owner and driver of the Chaparral sports car team, Hap Sharp, died by suicide after being diagnosed with cancer at the age of 65. Born on New Year's Day in 1928, his nickname Hap was short for Happy New Year, Sharp had founded Chaparral with Jim Hall and co-driven with him to great success between 1962 and 65, as well as the 1967 Targa Florio, with former F1 champion Phil Hill. Sharp also made 6 appearances in Formula One races, twice at the US Grand Prix in privately entered Coopers in 1961 and 62, and racing at the US and Mexican races for Reg Parnell in a Lotus in 1963, and for Rob Walker in a Brabham in 1964, his best result being 7th and just outside the points in Mexico City in 63. The Eurovision Song Contest took place between races in one of the most unusual venues in the event's history. Following Linda Martin's win in Sweden in 1992, it was RTE's turn to host, and the Irish national broadcaster wanted to spread the love around a bit and host it outside Dublin for a change. Enter entrepreneur Noel C. Duggan, who'd just finished a major renovation of the Green Glens Arena in his native County Cork. A venue for equestrian events, agricultural shows and the like, it had a new indoor arena seating 3,500, which he offered to RTE for free, along with a further £200,000 sweetener raised by local businesses. And so the Eurovision Song Contest came to Mill Street, comfortably the smallest place ever to host it, with nearby Cork and Killarney hosting the civic events. Ironically, this was also the largest contest yet in terms of entries, which had been extended to 25 to accommodate increasing interest from Central and Eastern Europe, and following the qualifying session several weeks earlier, acts from Slovenia, Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina made their debuts. The Bosnian entry got a particularly warm welcome in the hall after having had to dodge sniper fire at Sarajevo Airport on the way there. There was a nail-biting finish to the voting, with Ireland leading the UK by 11 points, with one jury still to report. After awarding the lower points, the Maltese still had to award the 10 and the 12 points, and hadn't yet given any to either of the leaders. 10 points went to Luxembourg, so it was all down to the last score of the evening.
And finally, Ireland.
Malta had historically been quite generous in giving points to the UK, so John Major's government may have been thinking about sending in a gunboat at that point. The Formula One teams all arrived in Monaco, which was set to finally join the UN a couple of days later, in the aftermath of Max Mosley dropping something of a live round into the debate on regulations by saying he was planning to announce a ban on all electronic devices for 1994, to howls of outrage from Williams and McLaren among others. They threatened to take him to court for violating the Concord Agreement. He contended that that only applied to technical regulations, and these were sporting regulations. Not only were Max and Bernie Ecclestone both now united in wanting the electronics ban, but they'd also made an unexpected ally, Jean-Marie Balestre, who had reconciled with Mosley and was willing to stand down and allow Max's proposed merger of the FIA and FISA in exchange for the presidency of a new FIA Senate. Since 1984, either Prost or Senna had won Monaco every year, with Senna having won 5 and the last 4 in a row, which put him on equal footing with the previous record winner Graham Hill. So Senna would be keen to take the record outright and make it 6, Prost would be keen to break his rival's domination, while Damon Hill could keep the record in the family. The only other previous winner in the field was Riccardo Patrese, who'd won the chaotic 1982 race. He'd have to go some to win this one, but that had been true 11 years earlier too. Williams, for their part, hadn't won since Keke Rosberg in 1983, and Renault never had, despite Prost's best efforts in 1981, 82 and 83. so there was plenty to play for all that everyone insisted that records meant nothing and they were all solely focused on this weekend. Hill had at least driven F1 at Monaco before, albeit only by failing to qualify his Brabham last year nearly 6 seconds off the pace, but Michael Andretti, Fabrizio Barbazza, Alessandro Zanardi, Luca Badoer and Rubens Barrichello were all Monaco rookies, with Senna taking time out to help both his teammate and Rubinho with plenty of advice. As usual at Monaco, the first qualifying session was on Thursday, and Betty Hill was present to watch her son shine in the rain to take provisional pole 0.7 seconds ahead of Prost, while Senna had a big off at Saint-Devote in the morning, but still managed 5th fastest with a dislocated thumb all strapped up. On Saturday the sun was back out, and while Damon had a big shunt when a rear wishbone broke, Prost maintained his 100% pole record, with Michael Schumacher, newly moved to Monaco, throwing his Benetton around to join him on the front row, 0.6 seconds behind, with Senna improving to 3rd, just a whiff under a second off Prost, alongside Hill. The Ferraris were going better with a lazy 5th and Berger 7th, either side of Patrese, with the inseparable pair of Wendlinger and Andretti 8th and 9th, and Comas doing well in the ever-improving Larousse at the team's 100th race in 10th. Alio might have done better than 15th too if he hadn't blown an engine. The Ligier and Lotus teams, previously very promising, were both struggling. The blue cars handled badly when light on fuel, while the red, white and green ones just couldn't find grip and ended up alongside each other on rows 7 and 10. Barbazza had to qualify in Fittipaldi's car and managed it in his now usual 25th spot, while Alboreto used his experience to make the grid in 24th as the inexperienced Badoer clouted the barriers at Mirabeau on his best run and didn't make it to race day. The traditional F3 non-championship support race was won this year by Italian Gian Antonio Pacchioni, ahead of his fellow countryman Giancarlo Fisichella and Dutch driver Jos Verstappen, and then under blazing sun and clear skies it was time for the big guns to come out. On came the green lights and away they went, with Prost leading away into Saint-Devote, followed by Schumacher, Senna and Hill, as almost everyone made it through without incident. Blundell bounced off Katayama and went straight on, getting going again at the back, while Andretti had a gearbox glitch and got away badly, then been hit by Barbazza, who'd made a great start and made up 8 places. The American came in for a new nose, while the Italian elected to soldier on with a slightly bent steering rack since it couldn't really be replaced. So, as Prost leading with Schumacher and Senna right behind, then a small gap to Hill, with the 2 Ferraris right on his rear wing, and as the first couple of laps passed, the top 3 began to spread out a bit. On lap 3, Prost lapped Andretti, who'd rejoined after a long repair stop, and the following lap Blundell pulled off to retire, having cracked his suspension in his first corner altercation. Like Brundle last time, he might not be too disappointed, as he jarred his back quite badly in a qualifying shunt, and he'd been happy just to make the grid. It took Senna longer than he would have liked to lap his teammate, even when the American practically jumped out of the way at the Nouvelle chicane, which allowed Schumacher to pull away too, and the German celebrated by putting up a fastest lap. He was slowly reeling Prost in when it was announced that Prost's start had been just a smidge too perfect and he was given a 10-second stop-go penalty. He had crept a little at the start to be sure, but whether he'd actually jumped it was certainly arguable, and a 10-second stop so early in the race would be a big penalty. After a couple of laps with Schumacher still gaining, Prost came in at the end of lap 12, only to stall it on the exit. The Williams team restarted the car, but first gear refused to engage and it stalled again. Finally he got away 22nd and a lap down, while Michael Schumacher was now comfortably in the lead with Senna 11 seconds back. The rest of the field were pretty spread out too, with 4.5 seconds back from Senna to Hill, then 3 seconds back to Alesi, another 4 back to Berger, 4.5 back to Patrese, and 14 back to Wendlinger and Leto running together. Senna did actually have a Williams right behind him, but it was Prost, just over a lap down and apparently happy to let Senna past and go, as he set about taking a deep breath and seeing what he could do. Leading by some distance and still pulling away he might be, but Schumacher couldn't afford many more of the kind of slips he made on the exit to Lowe's on lap 16. Prost was making his way up through the lower orders, passing De Cesaris, Katayama and Barbazza, with Hill hot on his heels but delayed enough for Alesi to have caught up too. Schumacher was really flying, trying to pull out enough of a gap over Senna to be able to make a stop for tyres. The Mark I Benetton traction control was proven to be hard on the rear tyres in particular, and he would probably need to make a stop when the others didn't. Hill seemed reluctant to lap Prost, but it was going to become a problem soon if it allowed Alesi to start attacking him for third, and Berger wasn't far behind his teammate either. Further back, the two Saubers were still running close together in 7th and 8th, Wendlinger leading Leto. On lap 25, Leto tried to go round the outside at lows, Wendlinger didn't leave room, and contact was made. The Austrian's car bounced, but the Finns hit the Armco hard enough to break his suspension and pulled off into the escape road, joining Blundell and Thierry Boutsen, who'd pulled out with a suspension problem on lap 12, in retirement. Prost moved up to 15th past Zanardi and Suzuki, and Hill managed to squeeze past Zanardi as well just in time at the Nouvelle chicane, leaving the number 11 Lotus little option but to cut up a lazy or go off, not that the Frenchman was sympathetic to his plight. That gave Damon a bit more breathing room as Prost passed Alliot for 14th. Unseen, Senna had now put his foot down a bit and was starting to lap quicker than Schumacher and catch him, though the German was still somewhere ahead. The gap on lap 30 of the scheduled 78 was 15 seconds, as Alboreto pulled all the way off to let the leaders through, then turned round to retire with a broken gearbox. Wendlinger came in, his brief bunny hop having knocked something loose in the electronics. He departed after quite some time at the back and with two new black boxes. Then suddenly Schumacher was climbing out of a smoking Benetton at lows. His active suspension had sprung a hydraulic fluid leak, which caught fire, billowing out clouds of rather nasty-looking smoke and putting paid to his dreams of winning his first Monaco Grand Prix, as Senna swept through into the lead. Everyone else behind moved up too, of course, so Hill was second, some 16 seconds behind, Alesi and Berger third and fourth, Patrese a rather distant fifth, and Comas now up into sixth, while Prost had progressed up to ninth past Barrichello as the marshals craned the smoking Benetton out of the way. Just as in Barcelona, Comas lost Senna some time, and Prost seemed to have finally got his finger out and was lapping quicker than Senna too, making his way up past Brundle, then Warwick, and then on lap 38 passing Comas to get into the points. Berger peeled in for new tyres on lap 40, sufficiently far ahead of 5th place Patrese not to lose the place, and the Italian was in next time round anyway, only to stall on the exit and drop 3 places, rejoining behind Comas and Brundle, who were having a fearsome scrap over the last points place, which Comas had now regained. Hill, much less experienced at dealing with traffic than Senna, had dropped a lot of time as the pair went through back markers, the gap now extending to over 30 seconds by lap 45, though not as much as Alesi, whose range of gestures apparently did include thank you, in this case to Johnny Herbert for getting smartly out of the way, but who got thoroughly stuck behind Comas, while Patrese had now caught back up to Brundle to make it a 3-way scrap over the last point. Alesi finally got through just as Berger arrived on the tail of the three of them, and on lap 50, Patrese nipped past Brundle and Berger followed. Suzuki careened off a wall at the swimming pool and stopped, fortunately just out of the way but bringing out the yellow flags, while Berger was still following Patrese, who now went past Comas too. With Senna leading by nearly half a minute, there was plenty of time for him to come in for a not especially quick tyre stop and still get out in the lead. In fact, he rejoined in front of Andretti, 13th and 2 laps down, who was not having a great weekend all told. Senna's lead was down to 6 seconds now, but he was on fresh rubber. Brundle had a go at Comas on lap 53, but the Larousse cut across and tripped over the Ligier's nose, sending Martin into the pits for a new nose, but puncturing his own left rear tyre in the process, and he had to pull in and retire before he could make it round to the pits. Brundle returned to the track 11th and just ahead of Senna, holding up the McLaren for a full lap as he tried to get his tyres up to temperature. Patrese was still going well in 6th, until his engine died, promoting Barrichello into the points, but the Jordan's tyres were heavily worn and the other young Brazilian, Fittipaldi, was closing fast. Also closing fast was Berger, who on fresh rubber was gaining hand over fist on Alesi, who'd slowed up with an overheating engine. The two Loti nearly took each other out as they tangled over 8th, and then on lap 60 it was warring teammates at Ferrari, as Berger tried to go inside at lows, missed his braking and touched the other car, but lightly enough that they both got away with it to the relief of all concerned, as Berger managed to make his way through. Off-camera, Fittipaldi had got ahead of Barrichello, while Zanardi went past Herbert at lows just as Senna lapped them both. Johnny's gear selector was playing up and he began to drop back, and Senna re-lapped Prost, who'd unlapped himself during Senna's pit stop. Coming out of the Rascasse, Herbert's gear selector failed entirely, and he almost stopped, then was torpedoed by Brundle. The cameras missed the incident, which Martin survived, but Johnny was out once again, coming to rest right next to the BBC's Jonathan Palmer, who he was getting heartily sick of talking to before the race was actually over. Berger was still charging, apparently set on taking second off Hill, and was now only 3 seconds behind the Williams with 11 laps to go. Hill was once again stuck in traffic, in this case Zanardi, Brundle and Andretti in 8th through 10th, while 7th place Barrichello finally admitted defeat and came in for new tyres, rejoining behind that little group. Andretti got out of Hill's way, but Zanardi and Brundle were so wrapped up in their own scrap that when the Ligier lunged through at the Nouvelle chicane, the resulting brake check nearly collected Hill and allowed Berger to get right into Damon's slipstream. Unnoticed in all the excitement, Andretti also went straight on and bounced across the curbs. With 8 laps to go, Hill and Berger both passed Zanardi, but Berger tried to follow through around Lowe's and didn't get away with it this time, hitting the Williams amidships and tipping it round into a spin. Both cars came to a stop, a furious Hill keeping it running, executing a 3-point turn and getting away, with a lazy, who'd had to come to a complete stop himself, now right behind. But Berger had stalled, and so had Andretti, who was parked right behind him. The Ferrari was pushed out of the way, and the American managed to bump start his McLaren and get moving again. So, Hill's dog-eared Williams was still second, and soon pulling away from a lazy whose engine was overheating again, and whose tyres were also shot. Berger's indiscretion had promoted Prost to 4th but 40 seconds back, so there didn't seem much chance of him catching a lazy, with Fittipaldi now 5th, with Brundle and Zanardi close behind. Prost had proved a point by sitting fastest lap, but with no hope of improving on 4th, elected to hold station behind Senna in the closing laps and have 1 fewer lap to do, and the last 4 laps passed more or less uneventfully. Senna came home to win his 5th Monaco Grand Prix in a row and his 6th overall, not only the all-time record in the Principality, but nobody had won any Grand Prix 6 times before. Damon Hill did his father proud with 2nd place in his first race at Monaco, with Jean Alesi opening his 1993 account with Ferrari's first podium of the year, delighted to finish with, as he put it, his tyres on the canvas and his water temperature in the stars. Prost came home a deeply annoyed 4th, still stewing over the stop-go penalty he thought was a hugely disproportionate penalty for a slight infraction at the start. Nonetheless, 3 points are 3 points. Fittipaldi put yet more points on the board for Minardi, who had now already had their best season ever, with Brundle salvaging a point for Ligier after a pretty eventful race. Zanardi finished 7th, Andretti 8th, and Barrichello 9th, all Monaco rookies and on Rubinho's 21st birthday to boot, with Andrea de Cesaris chalking up Tyrrell's first finish of the year in 10th. Barbazza, Alio and Wendlinger completed the finishers, Karl's first finish of the year, though Berger had gone far enough to be officially classified 14th. Senna cheekily apologised to Hill in the Parc Fermé for breaking his father's record, to which Damon graciously replied that if Graham had been there, he would have been the first to congratulate him and would have been proud that his record had been broken by such a great champion. Other drivers were less impressed with their fellows. Comas and Brundle had a bit of a set to, as did teammates Leto and Wendlinger, Swiss chocolates in short supply at the Sauber post-race briefing, as they were both torn off a strip by their boss. So, Senna regained the championship lead by 5 points over Prost, while Hill regained 3rd from Schumacher, and Williams' 9 points to McLaren's 10 made the gap at the top now 11 points, with Minardi tying for 5th with Lotus. Next up was a quick jaunt across the Atlantic to Montreal, but before that the all-important FIA Extraordinary General Assembly was due to meet to thrash out the details of the 1994 regulations.